All right, and welcome back to the First Team Fantasy Podcast. We've got part two of our morning slate of the games. We're going to start it off one that we were a bit wrong about again, but
Yeah.
it's week two of the season. It's going to happen. And that was the Colts going into Lambeau to take on the Packers. The over under in this one was 40 and a half, and the Colts were favored by 2.5 points. The Packers won 16 to 10.
Yeah.
So this game to me was kind of a show of how good Matt LaFleur is as a coach because he was able to effectively take Malik Willis um, and still win that game. Malik Willis didn't play horrible, and they really just killed the Colts on the Colts run defense looks like an every week play for your running backs this year.
Yeah, it does.
Um, But yeah, to their offensive side of the ball, where we saw a lot of disappointments. Anthony Richardson was 17 for 34, 204 yards, with a touchdown and three interceptions. And he had four rushing attempts for 37 yards, finished with 12.86 points. He looked like a rookie in
Yeah.
this game. The Colts got out coached. They didn't have many answers for either side of the ball. And Richardson just continues to struggle with a lot of the easier throws that most starting quarterbacks in the NFL make.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd like to hope for improvement as he is inexperienced, but how long are we going to be able to use that as kind of an excuse? They do have Joe Flacco as a backup. Um, I'm not saying that he's going to get benched like Bryce Young anytime soon, but just knowing that, it's like you'd like to see some improvement with his accuracy for sure.
Yeah.
Because he's sitting at like a 50% completion rate, which is just not,
Yeah.
it's not going to get it done. Moving on to the running back, Jonathan Taylor, finished pretty decent, had 12 attempts for 103 yards, caught two of his four targets for 32 yards, giving him 15 and a half points on the week. I mean, he's going to get work. Um, Yeah, I mean JT is a safe start for the Colts, unlike the next guy I'm going to talk about, who I am starting to grow more and more concerned with every single week. And that's Michael Pittman Jr.
Yeah.
Um, he got 7 targets, tied for the lead in this receiving room, but only caught three of them for 21 yards. And a lot of his targets are between like 5 and 10 yards. And it's not where Richardson is just a lot of it. I've been watching this game, and a lot of the targets to Pittman, Richardson was kind of on the run, and he's just not very accurate on the run for one, and in that intermediate area he just has not been able to connect with a lot of guys. um so yeah, Pittman caught 3 targets for 21 yards, finishing with 5.1 points. While he is continuously getting a decent target share, it's just where those targets are coming, and they're not very accurate targets. It's getting to a point where he's definitely receiving bench consideration, especially since this is the second week in a row that he has been outperformed by fellow wide receiver Alec Pierce,
Yeah.
who also got 7 targets, but he caught 5 of them for 56 yards and a touchdown. So he finished with 16.6 points. Alec Pierce is currently the wide receiver 8 on the year. Granted, he had that blow up game week one,
Yeah.
but Anthony Richardson seems to be skilled in one thing when it comes to throwing, and that's the deep ball.
Yeah.
And Alec Pierce, I mean, it's his sophomore year as compared to Adonai Mitchell. He's a rookie. Um, I saw something about them competing for playing time or competing for. Alec Pierce is on the field 95% of the time week two after being on the field 84% of the time in week one. He's on the field all the time. Anthony Richardson trusts him, has said that
Yeah.
Alec Pierce is a guy that everybody sleeps on, should watch out for. I mean, at this point, Alec Pierce is a definite add, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I obviously don't. He's not. I don't think he's going to get a touchdown every week. But even without that, the 5 for 56 is a lot more consistent than even Michael Pittman, who was kind of who we thought was the floor guy for this team. And should that change, I'm just very concerned with Pittman right now. But Alec Pierce is definitely very valuable.
Yeah.
Adonai Mitchell had a couple key drops in this one. Finished one catch on 4 targets for 30 yards, giving him 4 points. He might be a guy that pops off later on down the line in this season, but you have to remember Josh Downs is coming back, a guy that was fairly relevant throughout last season. So I think it's kind of the work for him and Ashton Doolin that will be taken away when Downs comes back. I'm not very much concerned with Alec Pierce's production right now, given that he is the most productive receiver on this team. Outside of that, if all of the Colts tight ends could combine into one, it would have been a decent game.
Hmm.
Between the tight end room, they got 5 targets and 3 catches for a total of, I think it's 43 yards. So it would have been 7.3 points out of the Colts tight end room. But
Yeah.
as you can tell, individually, none of them are really worth too much. That's really all for this game. We thought the Colts defense might be decent. They let Josh Jacobs do whatever he wanted, aside from score that touchdown. Oh my God, that was heartbreaking. But
Yeah.
yeah,
It's and the tough part is yeah, now the Colts, they're going to play the Bears and the Steelers the next 2 weeks. The Bears, if anything, do have a solid defense. We saw them give the Texans some issues. The Steelers obviously have a solid defense, so these are a very big 2 weeks that realistically the Colts are going to need Michael Pittman to perform in these games. That's obviously up to Anthony Richardson, so we will see.
yeah,
And the Packers side of the ball without Jordan Love, who fantasy sites, because of the Packers, did not want to rule out for basically the entire week, even though it was obvious he was not going to play. Had to roll with Malik Willis, who I had very little hope for, and Malik Willis played an amazing game for what they needed him to play. He only threw the ball 14 times. He completed 12 of them, 122 yards and a touchdown, carried it 6 times on the ground for 41 yards. We needed him to not turn the ball over and not force things, and that's what he did. He finished with just about 13 fantasy points. And we mentioned out of the pass catchers, the only one we would feel comfortable starting was Jaden Reed, just because of his playmaking ability. He didn't have the greatest game. He was only targeted twice. He caught both of them for 9 yards, had 2 carries on the ground for 37. He gave us 6.6. So not an absolute dud. He's finishing right around like a Terry McLaurin, a Michael Pittman. He still gave us some production. But, better weeks will come when Jordan Love gets back in that lineup. It is the same really throughout the wide receiver room. There wasn't too many yards to go around. Christian Watson didn't see a target. Romeo Doubs caught all 3 of his for 62 yards, finishing 9.2. That's actually a decent week. Dontavion Wicks was the one to get in the end zone, catching 3 of his 4 targets for 26 yards, giving him 11.6. If there was a question if Luke Musgrave would bounce back as potentially the tight end 1, I do not think that's going to happen. Tucker Kraft finished with 3.6 fantasy points, Luke Musgrave 1.6. I don't think we can start either of the Packers tight ends at this point. The star of the day, none other than Josh Jacobs. 32 carries for 151 yards, but does lose the fumble on what would have been a touchdown. So he finishes with 13.1 instead of 21.1. That is a swing. That's an 8-point
And
swing.
had another touchdown called back on a hold. It was
Yeah,
it wasn't an awful day, but a painful one for us Josh Jacobs owners.
for sure. He was very productive, very high usage, which basically everyone knew was going to be the case. But yeah, we could have hoped for a better finish than that. Um, Emmanuel Wilson carried it 5 times for 9 yards. He was not very efficient. Worth noting, though, because Marshawn Lloyd was injured to start the season, did play in this game. Got 6 carries, actually, for 15 yards, caught his target for 3 yards. But he re aggravated that ankle, so he is now on the IR. If you have Josh Jacobs, it is worth looking into Emmanuel Wilson because if something did happen to Josh Jacobs, Emmanuel Wilson's the last guy standing there. There's just no, and I assume they'll bring in someone. We discuss some potential people that we'd be interested to see them bring in, but until then, Emmanuel's the only other guy there. Our favorite kicker, Braden Arvison, had 11 fantasy points, and the defense had 12. So if you did, the whole time I was thinking the Colts defense was going to be the streaming defense, and it ended up being the Packers. It's just,
Well, it was the Chargers, but
yeah, I mean, yes, the Chargers were like the number one, but we are like, if you
yeah.
couldn't grab them and you like with what was left, yeah. But
Yeah, they tore Anthony Richardson to shreds.
yeah, it so it was a surprising game to see how it played out, and honestly, in my opinion, this next game kind of was as well. The Browns beat the Jaguars 18-13 in Jacksonville. Deshaun Watson still does not look very good. He was 22 of 34 for 186 yards. No touchdowns, no picks. Carried it 5 times for 20 yards. Did get in the end zone on the ground. He gave you 15.4 if you did start him. I can't imagine unless in dynasty leagues or extremely deep leagues, but a decent fantasy week. Jerome Ford, we did not see as much usage as we are used to seeing from him. He only carried the ball 7 times for a very productive 64 yards. He caught one of his 2 targets for no yards, giving you 7.4. Um, it was a weird one because he played 44% of the snaps. We saw a lot of Deontay Foreman in this one. He played 38% of the snaps, but he carried it 14 times compared to Jerome's 7 for 42 yards. Caught his lone target for 9 yards for 6.1. I've seen it just strictly had to do with the game script and just kind of how it went.
I mean, the Browns did this last year too. When they brought Kareem Hunt back, they just refused to give all the work to Jerome Ford. I mean, we saw good
Yeah,
weeks out of Jerome Ford last year, and they just do not want to make him the workhorse back there. Apparently, they're not going to do it.
yeah.
So, I mean, that's why I didn't like him that much going into draft. His value's just limited, and now that Deontay Foreman's healthy, it's just going to look gross, especially until Nick Chubb gets back. When
Yeah. So something to heavily monitor going forward. Another thing that I'm concerned about, it's just at some point, some of these just have to start going the right way. It's Amari Cooper. He saw 8 targets again in this one. He saw 9 last week, 8 this week. He only catches 3 for 11 yards. He had a pretty bad drop, like a pretty bad drop that could have gave him a better fantasy finish. But so he finishes with 4.1. Someone that has looked very good so far for the Browns is Jerry Jeudy. And again, he's a very talented receiver. Didn't work out in Denver, but it's not like he was bad in Denver and then came here. He was a solid wide receiver and is had a good first 2 weeks. He was targeted 6 times, caught 5 of them for 73 yards, giving him 12.3. This ball got spread around more than I would have liked because even Elijah Moore saw 8 targets, catching 6 of them for 44 yards, 10.4. It just sucks if you have Amari Cooper to one, see the targets being that evenly dispersed, and then two, see Jerry Jeudy and Elijah Moore doing more with those targets. So that's my cause for concern. I think Amari can get it going. I just, like in our home league, I kept him in this week 2, but week 3, I have a better option, and I think I'm going to roll with them until Amari can get it going. I don't want to keep throwing him out there and seeing 4 or 5 point finishes. It's just, you do it too many weeks and then you find yourself in a weird spot. But I still have hope for Amari. David Bell had 5.7 fantasy points. That's ridiculous. And then the tight end. I thought he would get more volume. Jordan Akins, he was only targeted once, which he caught for 10 yards, giving him 2. He's not David Njoku. David Njoku, when he comes back, will have solid fantasy finishes, but it just shows when he is out, I don't think Jordan Akins is a viable play. Dustin Hopkins gave you 13, and the Browns defense gave us 11. So they did find a way to win the game, which is surprising.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, their defense is very good. And going into the Jaguars side of the ball, where they just, for a lot of this game, weren't really able to do much at all. Um,
Yeah.
Trevor Lawrence was 14 for 30 for 220 yards, had 2 rush attempts for 45 yards, and that was the game for him. No touchdowns, no interceptions, no fumbles, 13.3 fantasy points. That was it.
Mm-hmm.
Um, So yeah, Travis Etienne had 13 attempts for 52 yards and a touchdown, caught 3 of his 4 targets for 6 yards, giving him a 14.8 point finish.
Mm-hmm.
An interesting thing in this one, Tank Bigsby did not play any offensive snaps. He got injured on a kickoff
Yep.
return. Yeah, on a kickoff return in the second quarter. So he logged no snaps in this one. Dernis Johnson played 28% of snaps and got 5 attempts for 26 yards. Um, I would just like to see a little bit more efficiency out of Travis Etienne,
Yeah.
but so far he's not burning you at all. He's gotten in the end zone in the first 2 weeks, so I mean you're still continuing to roll with Etienne, especially I mean, Bigsby and his efficiency last week looked like somewhat of a threat, and then he gets hurt this week, doesn't play an offensive snap. So
Yeah.
we'll see going forward. We know what Travis Etienne is to this team, though.
Yeah.
The lead receiver, yet again this week for the Jacksonville Jaguars, rookie Brian Thomas Jr. He caught 2 of his 4 targets for 94 yards, giving him 11.4 points. He did not play. I mean, he played 3 more snaps than he did last week, but Christian Kirk did log more. Christian Kirk played 88% of the snaps, while Brian Thomas Jr. played 73. For some reason, it looks like Gabe Davis kind of stepped in and took the wide receiver 1 role over, like just effectively in the sense of being on the field.
Yeah.
In game 1, he was out there for 94% of the snaps, 95% of the snaps in this one,
Yeah.
out snapping both Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. Though I believe Brian Thomas is the best wide receiver on this team. He's
Mm-hmm.
kind of proved that through the first 2 weeks, though not being out there the most, being the most productive of all the wide receivers.
Yeah.
Um, Speaking on Gabe Davis, he had 7 targets, but caught 3 of them for 43 yards, 7.3 points, which is still much, much, much better than Christian Kirk. This, I talked about hitting the panic alarm before with Terry McLaurin in the last episode, or not hitting the panic alarm with him. With Michael Pittman, I'm a bit more worried. With Christian Kirk, it's like obviously we're only 2 games in, you can't drop him, but he's like so buried on my bench right now. It's
Mm-hmm.
going to take a great performance. One catch on 3 targets for a yard in the wrong direction, giving him point 0.9 fantasy points. Not even a full point.
Yeah.
Christian Kirk is, I mean, it's a horrible start to the year for him. And granted, we like to say like 1 game or 2 games don't make the whole season, but with a start like that, it's just you can't start him at this point, especially with Brian Thomas looking so much better and Gabe Davis getting more work.
Yeah.
So you're benching him, hoping that better days come back.
For sure.
Um, with the absence, the I might add very, very late absence.
Yeah.
He was injured in the pregame, talking about Evan Ingram. Brenton Strange, backup tight end, stepped in and played 68% of the snaps, caught 3 of his 6 targets for 65 yards, and gave you 9.5 points from a backup emergency tight end position.
It's amazing.
Uh, I mean, if you for some reason had the foresight to pick up Brenton Strange at the last second, wow,
Yeah.
that that's a hell of a move. But
Yeah.
hopefully Evan Ingram returns to the lineup next week and those performances go to him.
Yeah.
But again, we see there's value in the tight end role in Jacksonville. But other than that, Luke Farrell, the other tight end, caught his 2 passes for 13 yards. So that was about it for the Jags side of the ball. Just really hoping for better days for Christian Kirk.
Yeah.
And I mean, some people are, not me. I drafted Brian Thomas and traded for him in Dynasty. So I'm hoping the rookie completely takes over and runs with it. But it is curious the disappearance of Christian Kirk. That's
It's
not
hard to
anything
imagine
I
it
was
stays to
expecting
this
coming into the.
degree.
Yeah, and not this bad, at least.
Yeah.
Um, but anyways, getting into our next game, the Jets went into Tennessee to take on the Titans. Over under in this one was 41 points, and the Jets won 24-17, where they are also favored by 3.5. So wow, good job, Vegas. Um, Aaron Rodgers in this one had a decent game, 18 for 30, 176 yards and 2 touchdowns, 2 rushing attempts for 1 yard, 15.1 fantasy points. Not a horrible day, especially considering what we saw out of some other options and some that we will discuss later down the line. Um, Brees Hall gave us another nice performance, which is actually very surprising had you heard what had gone on in this game,
Yeah.
because their backup running back, effectively, Braylon Allen, scored 2 touchdowns in this game. You'd hear that and think there's no way Brees could have had a good finish, but 14 attempts for 62 yards, and then also caught 7 of his 8 targets for 52, and one of the nicest touchdowns we will probably see this year. That was a beautiful pass and a beautiful catch. He finished
Yeah.
with 24.4 points, and Brees Hall is just an every week start. Not even close to worried about Braylon Allen, but I'm interested in Braylon Allen.
Yeah.
On the other hand, as compared to guys like Jalen Wright, who I was thinking about, and um, the one for the Ram, Blake Corum, it looks like they are planning on using Braylon Allen just throughout the game. I mean, he's good, and he looked good on an NFL field against a pretty good defense where, I mean, they won by a touchdown. So it's not like he was getting garbage time touches.
Mm-hmm.
He played 35% of the snap. I mean, Braylon Allen, he's one that we're going to talk about on the waiver episode, and I have serious interest in.
Yeah.
But yeah, he 7 attempts for 33 yards for him and a touchdown. Caught 2 of his 4 targets for 23 yards and another touchdown, giving him 19.6 points. So 24.4 from Brees, 19.6 from Braylon, 3 touchdowns from the running back room. What did Garrett Wilson do, you may ask? And not too much yet again this week is the answer. 4 catches on 6 targets for 57 yards and 1 lone rush attempt for 5 yards, putting him over the double digit edge for 10.2 points. I'm not exactly worried about Garrett Wilson, but the New York Jets are definitely going to be a team that wants to lean on their defense and their run game, especially for the early parts of the
Yeah.
season. Um, and it's good. And that's just it's good football. If you have a good defense and a good run game, you don't want to have to rely on passing the ball. You want to turn away the game clock. You want to keep that lead. You want to keep your offense on the field and their defense on the field. It just makes sense.
Yeah.
So they're going to do that while they can. So that's also why I think Braylon Allen is a really good option. That being said, you're starting Garrett Wilson every week. But options like Alan Lazard and consequentially Mike Williams, who got his first real action, he caught his lone target for 19 yards, also played 65% of the snaps compared to 18% last week. Alan Lazard did play 82%, but he went down from the 100% that we saw last week. So, with them getting Mike Williams involved, it's going to
Mm-hmm.
take away from what we saw from Alan Lazard, which outside of Garrett Wilson, if it wasn't going to be consolidated to like one more guy, we know how much work that the running backs get out from that pass game.
Yeah.
So I'm not really interested in any of the other options in New York right now, at least while Mike Williams is getting acclimated there. He might be interesting later on in the season if you would like to keep him or Lazard rostered in case there's an injury or something. I don't hate it, but definitely neither one of them are startable right now.
Yeah.
And then Tyler Conklin caught one of his 2 targets for 10 yards. Oh, yeah, Alan Lazard got 4 targets, caught 2 of them for 11 yards, 3.1 points. So, Jets defense, though, 12 points.
Yeah.
They were indeed a good start this week. As I fear, streaming defenses against Will Levis might start becoming a trend.
He
He
had
makes a
another.
lot of bad mistakes with the football.
Yeah. Well, I mean, really quick, the Garrett Wilson, yeah, he expect much better weeks. It's just his next 2 weeks are against the Patriots, then the Broncos. So it's going to be Christian Gonzalez and then Pat Surtain. So we shall see. But yeah, him and Brees are. There's just not much space in that. If they're passing how they've been passing, there's not too much space for another guy in that wide receiver room. Whether it's Lazard or
Yeah.
Williams, it's just not too big of a piece of pie. So the Titans side of the ball, as we mentioned, Will Levis just makes very bonehead decisions. And if anyone can read lips, you would know what our Titans coach told Will Levis after one of just the worst fumble backward pass decisions you can make. He just has not been protecting the ball how he should. He finished this one 19 attempts for 28 yards, 100 for 19 completions on 28 attempts for 192 yards.
Okay.
I apologize. With
No.
right when I said it, I was like, that came out wrong. For 192 yards, a touchdown and an interception. He also had that fumble. That was just a horrible decision. He ran it 4 times for 38 yards, giving him 12.48. Let's call it 12.5. Someone that has been very productive for the Titans has been Tony Pollard so far. He carried it 17 times for 62 yards. He caught 5 of his 6 targets for 40 yards, giving him 15.2. That's back-to-back solid weeks for him. We saw Tyjae Spears get a bit of an ankle injury in this one. They have said he'll be all right, but was worth noting. He only got 6 carries for 20 yards, caught both his targets for 11, giving him 5.1. It is very obvious that Tony Pollard is going to be not the complete workhorse, but close
He's
to
the
it
guy.
in this backfield. Yeah, he is definitely the guy. And
I'll take it.
speaking of the guy in their wide receiver room, Calvin Ridley. Did you see the touchdown he got? I mean, Calvin Ridley can play football at a high level, and he showed it in
He had
this
a
one.
bad drop before that too.
And me, like that's what I'm
And he
saying.
also he had a weird game, but it was a good one.
Yeah, a very good fantasy game. Caught 4 of his 6 targets for 77 yards in that touchdown. He also rushed one in for a 10-yard touchdown, giving him
I said it was a weird
24.7.
game.
Yeah, he had a monster finish, and that's really it for the pass catchers. Like Tyler Boyd caught 2 of his 5 targets for 26, giving him 4.6. DeAndre Hopkins is still clearly not fully back. He only played 44% of snaps and was only targeted twice. Caught 1 of them for 9 yards, giving him 1.9. Chigakonkwo catches 3 passes for 16 yards, giving him 4.6. And due to limited opportunities, Nick Folk gives you 6. The defense gives you 2. It wasn't the greatest week for the Titans. I really like Tony Pollard. And Calvin Ridley did show... I mean, Will Levis last year showed that he could get DeAndre Hopkins the ball. Now that Calvin Ridley's kind of the guy there, he's shown flashes. So I like Calvin Ridley. I think he'll have more opportunities as we go on. Oh, the Buccaneers beating the Lions in Detroit. Some of the stat lines from this week are just so interesting to me. Like the Bucs beat the Lions 20-16. Baker Mayfield only completes 12 passes. He only threw the ball 19 times for 185 yards, a touchdown. He did throw a pick. He rushed it 5 times for 34 yards and got a touchdown on the ground, giving him 19.8. Another solid week for Baker. He's been a solid fantasy quarterback, really, since he took over in Tampa Bay. I mean, he has been a viable option. Rachaad White did injure his groin and returned pretty quickly. He played 71.
No, how solid Baker's been?
Huh?
Through 2 weeks, he's the QB1.
Yeah, I mean... Yeah. And he's been solid, but that gives you an idea of where the quarterback, where it's
Derek Carr is QB2.
We're living in the Matrix, it feels like, through 2 weeks. But yeah, Baker's literally been the best fantasy quarterback through 2 weeks. That is crazy. Rashad...
Josh Allen is not a top 5.
No, I mean, he had a bad...
I digress.
Yeah. Rachaad White was very inefficient in this one. We know he's inefficient on the ground. 10 carries for 18 yards is abysmal, though. And he only got targeted 1 time out of the backfield, which he caught for 5 yards. I mean, Baker only completed 12 passes, and 7 of them were to Chris Godwin. So that leaves 5 for the entire rest of the team. So... we'll see. It's worth monitoring Rachaad White. If he does, they seem to think he'll be all right as well. He did return to this game. But for whatever reason, if he did miss a week, it would be Bucky Irving, who saw 7 carries for 22 yards. He played 35% of snaps. Again, worth monitoring, especially if you have Rachaad White. Chris Godwin continues his absolute tear, catching 7 of his 8 targets for 117 yards and a touchdown, finishing with 24.7. I mean, I'm pretty sure Chris Godwin only had like 4 touchdowns all of last year, and he's got like half of that already through 2 weeks. And that was the big thing with him is we talked
He's
about...
currently the wide receiver 1 in PPR setting.
Yeah, we talked about last season. Oh, he only had 2. He has the exact same amount of touchdowns. And it's like where he finished last season, we mentioned, if he even caught 6 or 7 touchdowns on the season, that finish would have looked very different. So Chris Godwin, can still compete at a high level. As Schiff mentioned, they bring in Jalen McMillan, allow Godwin to go to the slot a little more where he's thrived in the past, and look what has happened so far. So if you drafted Chris Godwin, kudos to you. Mike Evans had a bit of a slow week. Targeted 6 times, caught 3 of them for 42, giving him 7.2. He's obviously not a guy I'm too worried about. Mike Evans is a week in, week out starter for you. He'll have much better finishes than that. McMillan is the third receiver out there. Caught one of his 2 targets for 21 yards, giving him 3.1. Cade Otton didn't catch either of his targets. Yeah, McMillan is someone to be interested in. It's just,
I think it's like a hold for later in the season, or
if
if
Godwin or
you
Evans miss
don't,
time.
yeah, or if you don't want to hold on to him and you want to try to get him like later on. I
Yeah,
don't know. To me, it could just end up being one of the guys that ends up popping off and people go to spend fab on if you already have
yeah,
him. It could just be one of those, especially with the amount of time that he's playing. I mean, he's on the field quite a bit.
for sure, for sure. And I mean, outside of that, Chase McLaughlin got 10 fantasy points. The defense gave us 5. It wasn't a, I mean, if you had Rashad, it was a bad week. But outside of that, not too many. Like Mike Evans, a bit of a disappointment, but Chris Godwin and Baker hit yet again.
Yeah, they did. And going to the other side of the ball, where I'm sure the fans of the Detroit Lions felt a lot like the fans of the Ravens this week. They went into this game favored by 7.5 points and ended up losing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Unlike the next game, a lot of it is much to Jared Goff has not really played well at all through the first 2 games of this season.
Yeah.
He threw the ball 55 times in this game, completed 34 passes for 307 yards, but threw 2 interceptions that very well could have been more,
Yeah.
and had 2 rush attempts for 5 yards, giving him only 10.8 fantasy points. I mean, at this point, I'm pumping the brakes on like trying to stream Goff entirely.
Yeah.
I That's 2 home games where he just hasn't. I mean, that's where he's performed well, especially last year. He did great,
Yep.
but I don't know. As of right now, I'm kind of moving off of Goff, especially since he's just a streaming option, not one that you're necessarily needing to roster the entire season. But another guy later on this team, I'm also very concerned with. But Jameer Gibbs and David Montgomery are not those guys at all. Jameer Gibbs, 13 attempts for 84 yards, caught all 7 of his targets for 22 yards, but finished with 17.6 points. David Montgomery, 11 attempts for 35 and a touchdown. I figured if he didn't get in the end zone, he'd have a bit tougher of a time this week against a pretty tough Tampa Bay run defense. And what he's good at is what they're good at stopping, which is why the 11 attempts for 35 yards. But he also added 35 yards through the air
Yeah.
on 4 catches. So 17 points for him. Good day for Montgomery. Amon-Ra St. Brown. Told you. I mean, everybody knew it was just a one off. He got
Yeah.
19 targets in this one, caught 11 of them, 419 yards, 22.9 fantasy points. I am definitely hoping that he is okay. Um, Good to go in this next game. Something that we will be monitoring throughout the week.
Mm-hmm.
But this next guy, I mean, was questionable coming into this game. We see him play 92% of the snaps. Jameson Williams caught 5 of his 11 targets for 79 yards and had one rushing attempt for 15 yards, giving him 14.4 fantasy points.
Yeah.
So it's very clear that this offseason, the Lions decided that they were going to get Jameson Williams very involved in this pass game.
Yep.
Um, they clearly let um, Josh Reynolds, who was kind of
Broncos.
serving,
Yeah.
yeah, as that wide receiver too, they let him walk. And Khalif Raymond's obviously not going to be that guy. They did get Tim Patrick, who played 39% of the snaps. Khalif Raymond did get 4 targets, which he caught 3 of for 27 yards. And Tim Patrick, in his first game as a Lion, got 3 targets, caught 2 of them for 12 yards, giving him 3.2 points. The only reason I bring these two up is because Sam Laporta
Yeah.
basically had the same fantasy finish as Tim Patrick.
Mm-hmm.
1 yard more. Caught 2 of his 3 targets for 13 yards, giving him 3.3 points. He's out there for 88% of the snaps. It's just a thing that, like, last year with with the way the Lions were, they didn't need to get, we've talked about this, they didn't need to get Jameson Williams involved. The way that the Lions were built last year got them all the way to that NFC Championship game.
Mm-hmm.
So it wasn't like they needed to just like change things once he came back and get him involved. Now that they had a whole off season to get him involved, I just see a game where even when Goff throws the ball 55 times, 30 of those go to Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jamison Williams, and then another 11 go to the running backs.
Mm-hmm.
So that's 41 of 55 targets and Laporta's only getting 3. So it's just a bit concerning. I'd like to say, and I think it will be true, that better days are coming for Laporta, especially since this is a game the Lions did not have a passing touchdown.
Yeah.
But it's definitely concerning, and there's no way to say that it's not concerning because, I mean, just Goff with the 2 interceptions, Laporta not doing much through the first 2 games. You'd like to see a lot more out of this Detroit offense that we all had high expectations for.
Yeah. I think, like you mentioned, coming into this offseason, we had such high hopes for Laporta because not many people saw Jamison Williams taking the leap that he has taken. But now that he has taken that leap, where, I mean, he's looked like a high end wide receiver 2 in fantasy. He's looked very good. So then, before you're thinking, oh, if Jamison Williams still, isn't that involved, whatever the case, Laporta's like this clear cut number 2. And then the season started, and it just has been honestly the opposite. Laporta's been getting the volume that Jameson saw last year, and Jameson's now getting Laporta volume. And I don't think it'll stay like this the whole season, but yeah, no, it's for sure worth looking into, and you're kind of in a bind just hoping which better weeks will come, but you just need them to, because if you drafted Laporta, you drafted him so high. Like, there is no, you know what I mean? You go to trade him right now, his value is not going to be nearly what you should be able to get for him. And that's just the world we live in today.
And I mean, I'm not looking to make a move at the tight end position unless I can like get, a tight end plus a much better player. Just because I feel like they're all lateral moves at this point.
Yeah.
The tight end, the whole position in general just has not performed. Isaiah Likely is still the tight end 1 through 2 weeks. Brock Bowers with his performance is now the tight end 2. And then it's Kittle, Trey McBride, Hunter Henry's at 5, Gesicki, Kyle Pitts, Zach Ertz, Pat Frymouth, and Foster Moreau finishes out the top 10 tight ends.
And
the first 2
Foster
weeks.
Moreau
So
didn't even get targeted this week. Just worth,
that was
what I mean?
awesome.
Worth noting. Like, he didn't even get targeted. So it just shows. Yeah.
So these tight ends are going to have good weeks, and weeks that they score touchdowns are going to put them above any other tight ends that are, being played that week.
Yeah.
As we see.
And me and Shifts, I mean, no matter the outcome, still our favorite game of the week. The Raiders traveling to Baltimore and playing the Ravens and winning a very close game, 26-23. Not only was it a good game, we also saw some pretty good finishes from guys that we were hoping to see them from. Gardner Minshew got it done through the air, especially fantasy wise to the weapons that we needed him to get it to. He finished 30 of 38, 276 yards, had a touchdown, an interception. He had one carry for -1 yard. Finishes just shy of 14 fantasy points, 13.94. Again, we're not looking to start Gardner, but we are hoping that a guy like Devontae Adams is going to be not hyper targeted, but the number one option here. And it was the case, especially late in this one. Devontae ends up with 9 catches on his 12 targets for 110 yards and a touchdown, giving him 26 fantasy points, which is exactly what we want to see from a guy we drafted in the second round. And as Schiff mentioned, it's only been 2 weeks, but I would like to say the clear number 2 option through the air for the Raiders is Brock Bowers. He looks good. He looks very good on the football field. He caught all 9 of his targets for 98 yards, giving us 18.8. And at a tight end position where, as we've talked about and everyone has seen, there's been so much inconsistency. If you waited on Brock Bowers and you got him late, he's someone that's shown us no sign of being anything but consistent. He's going to be a guy that gets targeted. He's a guy that, I mean, at this point, especially heading into next week against the Panthers, he has to be in your lineup. He's a guy that you should be starting going forward. Jacoby Myers, the wide receiver 2, he was targeted 5 times. He caught 4 of them for 29 yards, giving us 6.9. Again, he's worth holding a roster spot, but at this point, from what we've seen, it looks like he's the number 3 option, potentially the number 4, depending how much passing is going to the running backs. So he's worth holding on to, but I don't think we're going to see the production we saw from him last season. Trey Tucker gets a lot of run out there, but he only got 2 targets for 13 yards, giving him 3.3. The running backs, we saw a bit better of a week from Rachaad White, and something I wanted to see in this one was... I said Rashad. The second one, first it was Jamal and Javonte, and now it's Rashad and Zamir. Zamir White, we saw him play 63% of snaps, which is something I was hoping to see, was he would start getting at least out there more than Madison. He still wasn't efficient on the ground. He carried it 9 times for 24 yards, but he did see 4 targets, and he caught 3 of them for 14 yards, giving him 16.8, or giving him 6.8. I apologize.
You're good. Wait.
Yeah, he's like, how does that equal 16.8? Again,
like, I know you like the Raiders, but
not a good week for Zamir again, but we'll cover it in the preview. They play the Panthers next week. If there was a week for Zamir to have a good one, it is the week coming up. Alexander Madison only played 22% of snaps in this one. He didn't see a target out of the backfield. He carried the ball 4 times for 1 yard and a touchdown. There's the touchdown that could have went to Zamir, and he finishes double digits, but it goes to Madison. That's how it goes sometimes. So Madison finishes with 6.1. But again, Zamir should be the lead back, and we'll see going forward. But you know, if you drafted Zamir, you're holding him for now. We'll cover it in the preview about opinions for week 3. That's a just disgusting decision to make. Daniel Carlson, we saw a lot of action from. He gave us 18, and the Raiders defense only gave us 4. But that is it for the Raiders side of the ball, at least.
Yeah, and I mean, Brock Bowers was kind of a guy that I said just in one of our group chats going into the game that he's very likely going to get, I was like, he's probably going to get 10 targets in this game.
Yeah, a tough matchup.
He ends up with 9. But he is just, I mean, when you look at it, given the size and where he lines up, it's hard for a linebacker to guard him. It's hard for a DB to guard him, and he's got crazy hands. So
Mm-hmm.
he's just going to be a matchup nightmare throughout the entirety of this year. And I think the Raiders kind of figured out, week one's a bit tough. You're coming in with a new quarterback, you're going up against a division rival. You have true identity issues. You don't, when you're coming in with a new quarterback like that.
Yeah.
But they had a week to kind of figure out. And then after that first half as well, it kind of just got to the point where I think Antonio Pierce realized, I know I want to run the ball, but if we suck at it, just get the damn ball to Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers.
And
And
let
that's what they
them
did.
make it happen.
And
Yeah.
that's what they did. They realized that the Ravens did not have the personnel. And let's be honest, a lot of teams aren't going to have the personnel to guard Devontae Adams and Brock Bowers,
Yeah.
especially at the same time. And they kind of figured that out. And they hammered on that.
Yeah.
And they were able to go down and effectively win the game once they figured that out and they utilized that.
Yeah.
So kudos to the Raiders coaching staff. And what's your guys' offensive coordinator?
Luke Getzey,
Luke Getzey. Yeah,
first year.
he did he did a great job of turning it around and figuring it out in that game what they needed to do, and they did it.
Yeah.
Unlike the Ravens, who it was funny. I was talking to Derek about there were a couple times this week in the Eagles game that we'll talk about later in this game, and um, prop I think in the Niners game because they went for it on fourth down instead of kicking a field goal, and that was the like 2 plays later, the Justin Jefferson 97-yard touchdown.
Yeah.
But some of these teams try to, I don't know if they don't respect the matchup or what the deal may be, but they try to get cute in crucial situations.
Yeah.
The Ravens had it 3rd and 1 later in the fourth quarter, up by 7. And rather than just either running the ball with the reigning MVP or turning around and handing it off to Derrick Henry,
Either of
they
those.
tried to do a tight end sneak with the third string tight end,
Yeah.
having Derrick Henry line up in some weird gunner position. So he false starts 3rd and 6. That wasn't the be all end all in the game, but things like that, when you don't just take what's given to you with the players that you have,
Costs you.
it costs you, and it cost the Ravens in this one.
Yeah.
Anyways, on to fantasy football, which is what we're here to talk about, where Lamar Jackson was 21 for 34, 247 yards, a touchdown, a very strange interception. Um, 5 rushing.
Yeah.
That one was one of the weirdest ones I've seen. It like hit off the back of Rashad Bateman's hand.
Yeah.
But he had 5 rushing attempts for 45 yards. Could have been a bit more in that last play of the game, but he decided to pitch it,
Yeah.
which I do completely understand. You don't want to get yourself hurt for nothing.
Yeah.
17.4 points for him. Derrick Henry had another good game. One thing that Derrick and I talked about was Derrick Henry could realistically finish this season with 15, 16 touchdowns.
Yeah.
Well, we're 2 games in. He's 2 touchdowns in.
Mm-hmm.
18 attempts, 84 yards, and a touchdown. The Raiders were very good. I think one thing that they did was realize they didn't want to allow themselves to be run over all season after last week against the Chargers. So they fixed that pretty quickly.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the first half was disgusting for Derrick Henry, but he got it going in the second half. 18 attempts for 84 yards and a touchdown. Also caught his lone target for 12 yards, 16.6 points for him. Another week where we saw him play 46% of the snaps to Justice Hill's 54. I think just the Ravens have decided that as soon as they get behind the sticks, as soon as it's a 3rd down, they're bringing Justice Hill in. And when they're running hurry up, they're bringing Justice Hill in.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just because he's more accustomed to the offense. We'll see how that goes later on as the season goes. That being said, Derrick Henry still got 19 touches to Justice Hill's 6. So it's nothing I'd be worried about. But if you do need an emergency running back for a week, Justice Hill's not going to zero you
Yeah.
because they are going to use him every game.
I think you mentioned a good point though with Derrick Henry about it's not telescripting, but at least through 2 weeks, it seems like if Derrick Henry's on the field, the Ravens are probably running it.
Yeah, they've got to get a bit more creative with the play calling with Derrick Henry
Mm-hmm.
because it's like they'll only use certain formations, they'll only have him on the field at certain points. It's almost as bad as it was last year with the Titans with Derrick Henry, where if they put Tyjae Spears in, it's like, okay, they might run, but we know they're not going to pass like when Derrick Henry's in.
Because him
So it's kind of
playing,
just one of those, yeah.
he plays less than 50% of snaps and carries the ball 18 times in that time. So it's almost like if he's on the field,
Well, yeah, he
they're
was
more
on the
than
field
likely
for
running it.
30 snaps and he ran the ball 18 times and
And he caught the
of
one
the 30
pass.
times, yeah.
19 of the
So it's like
30
if he's on the
plays.
field, he's going to be involved, but it's like, yes, they could do a much better job
At
of
switching it up a little
just
bit.
being a little more creative.
Yeah.
You have Lamar Jackson, Derrick Henry back there. You don't have to be so one-dimensional. If it makes the offense one-dimensional, then why did we even go out and get him in the first place? But
Yeah.
that's neither here nor there. What is Zay Flowers' wonderful performance this week?
Yep.
7 catches on 11 targets for 91 yards and a touchdown, 22.1 points. Don't know why they didn't use him more in the second half, but I'm not a coach. Rashad Bateman played 82% of the snaps, so he is going to have involvement this year, which is one thing that I was curious about, how much he was going to be involved, whether or not Zay likely would, be a lot more prominent in this offense, but it appears that they are determined to make Rashad Bateman a part of this offense. He was on the field for 53 of the team's 65 total snaps and
He's the
only
clear wide
behind.
receiver too this season. The
He is.
clear.
Where kind of Odell was last season when he was on the field. And I mean, this is a healthy Rashad Bateman. This is what the team drafted him to be.
Mm-hmm.
Whether or not he excels in this role, or, I mean, we've never really been too thrilled with the Baltimore pass attack outside of the tight ends. And now we have Zay Flowers. But Rashad Bateman could be a decent flex option here or there if he continues to improve.
Yeah.
He's clearly going to be on the field.
Yeah.
Mark Andrews was back to business. Nothing crazy in this one, but he was on the field for 63% of the snaps to Isaiah Likely's 49%. Caught 4 of his 5 targets for 51 yards, giving him 9.1 points. Isaiah Likely still involved, got 3 targets, caught 2 of them for 26 yards, almost had an amazing catch on the sideline. Shout out to Jack Jones for effectively ending the game there, because
That
if
was
he
a
didn't,
crazy play.
that one was going into overtime.
Yeah.
But yeah, other than that, I mean, Justin Tucker, although he missed a 50-plus yarder, still hit 3 of 4 of his field goals and 2 extra points, giving him 13 points. So he remains as a decent option.
Oh, the
But still
morning games are
curious.
done, man.
Yes, they are. And we will be back. We'll have some waiver pickups for you guys. I
Yeah.
think this is a really interesting week for waivers. Along with, I think we're going to do some booms and busts for this
Mm-hmm.
previous week, because while there were a lot of players who just absolutely let us down, there were some rising stars that we're pretty interested in.
Yeah.
So we'll be back with that, as long as the afternoon, Sunday and Monday night games, and then later on in the week, the previews. And we're going to do a Thursday night head-to-head. So we're getting
Yeah.
those started again for you guys this week.
Yeah.
All right, go ahead and lead them out on this one, Derek.
The Raiders won this week. He's given me the privileges.
Yeah, you earned it.
As always, we appreciate the support. Any questions, comments, feel free to drop them in the comment section below. We really do appreciate the support, and we will be back next time. As always, come back next time. Take more ups to the first team.